So my name's Nathan Hegan, and I'm the Assistant Director of Education here. And I run this program where kids pick history topics, they bring them to the museum as a project, and they get them judged and evaluated and all that. And I started to think like the kids, because this year's theme for that project is rights and responsibilities in history. So then I started thinking about rights and responsibilities of citizens during wartime. And then I stumbled across this trial where it was civilians on trial as opposed to military leaders on trial for war crimes. Before I get too far into this, I'm going to be talking a lot, but the first one I'm going to have you guys read, and I'll come back to this at the end. And I'll add the context to this news article here when we get closer into the end of it. So Rüsselsheim was a war crimes trial. It was a trial where 11 German civilians, later 12, were put on trial for the lynching of Allied airmen who were brought through their town. Actually American airmen, even though at the time the Germans believed they were either Canadian or British, since the bombing run that went over their town was a British bombing run. And putting this into context, post-World War I, there were very few actual trials of anyone for war crimes in World War I. 12 Germans were brought to trial in German courts. This was a solution that made no one happy at the end of it. The Germans felt like they were being picked on. The fact that they got brought up on charges in German courts made it seem to the Allied powers that, well, they're getting to try their own people for their own war crimes. That's not a real trial. So a solution that no one was happy about, too much compromise in that one, which led to a rethinking of this at the October 1943 Moscow conference, where there's a statement on atrocities, and that is essentially the agreement that the Nazi war crimes and atrocities are going to face justice at the end of World War II. And they will face this justice where they committed their crimes. If the crimes were committed in Poland, they will face justice in Poland. If the crimes were committed in France, they will face justice in France. If the crimes are so large and so heinous as to not have a geographic location, they'll be tried by these powers in a joint thing. That will lead to the Nuremberg trials. Japan also faced trials at the end of the war. Japan is a slightly different animal on this one in that Japan attempted to do a similar thing. They passed what's called the Enemy Airmen's Act of 1942, and they actually made it a crime, a little bit of irony here, they made it a crime for bombers to attack their cities. So it was actually a crime, and if an Allied airman was captured in Japanese-held territory, they were put up in a sham trial and likely executed at the end of it. So in this whole context, we're looking at a trial of civilians that's going to happen very, very quickly after the German surrender. And to get a little context in the air war, if you've been coming to these lectures, you've learned a lot about the air war in the past few weeks. There is a really great one about the evolution of the air war that focused on the round-the-clock bombing, how our bombers could reach at night during the day. It almost never ended in some parts of Germany. And then the Battle of Berlin, so bombing runs on Berlin, kind of the stages and moving through with the war, and then shifting to the prelude to D-Day, making sure that bridges and things in France were taken care of so that the soldiers landing weren't faced with a strong German counterattack later. And then moving about August 44 into the destruction of basically Germany itself, the destruction of their will to fight, their destruction of their ability to wage war much longer. And this is going to be the area in which the Rüsselsheim trial occurs in. This is going to be an outpouring of this aspect right here, the destruction of Germany aspect. Now the two types of bombing, and most of you are already putting British and American into the categories here, strategic bombing, that's the morale busting, or the theory of morale busting. Bomb the cities, bomb them into submission, bomb their hospitals, bomb their schools, bomb their courthouses, level the cities if you can do it. That predominantly can be done at night. You don't really need to see much in there. And kind of thinking, you're looking at how the Germans did it, it's like the Battle of Britain, or it's like the night bombing that the British did later on. And then there's the more precision type bombing that requires bomb sites accuracy, good weather, typically bombing occurring during the day. This is going to be what angers the citizens of Rüsselsheim. This is going to be the run that the pilots that get lynched at the end of this were on themselves. They were on a tactical run for an airfield that was outside of a city. They're going to fall victim to the after effects of strategic bombing. To give a little more sense of what this all looked like, for those of you who haven't seen it, I picked the city of Darmstadt because it's where the trial is actually going to be held. It's close to Rüsselsheim. This is the type of destruction that people are seeing in this area of Germany, an area where there's a lot of manufacturing going on for aircraft parts and tank parts. And another one, you add the children in to help get the mindset of what the citizens were going through, and some more of this. And then we're going to add in Goebbels. And looking here, about the time that the round-the-clock bombing is starting, Joseph Goebbels is putting out his usual PR. He's giving his speeches. He's giving his ultimatums, his directives to the German people. June 1943, and somewhere else in the speech, he adds that these gangster terror flyers will be met with the knife somewhere else in here. This is more of a rallying cry, making the Germans feel they can still win this. You know, we're going to face this, but what we're feeling now is going to be the basis for our coming actions, what we're going to do. This is going to come out to play in the trial when we're looking at who's really responsible for what happens on the ground in Rüsselsheim. And if we fast forward 1 year, when the destruction runs are more in gear, when there's less resistance by the Luftwaffe, Goebbels, it's a lot more desperate tone. And this is the type of tone that's being felt in Germany in August of 44 all the way to the surrender in 45, that every person, and he's not talking about someone there on holiday, he's talking about a downed or an Allied air crew or Allied soldiers who are captured. If they're in Germany, what they're going to see is a German people who are making every sacrifice necessary that is going to help win this war or repel the invaders for as long as possible. So in Goebbels' words here, and these words will come to play in the trial, he's rallying and he wants the German people to push to possibly calling out for the lynching and the attacks of Allied airmen who will be there. And then there's the propaganda too. This is similar to what you see in a lot of other places that are being bombed. The air terror continues. You'll see these hanging, mothers send your children to safety, appealing to that protective aspect of people who live in these towns. A lot of these towns are deserted of the young men, those who would normally be the protectors, the firefighters. They're all fighting possibly on the Eastern Front. You have a lot of women in these towns, a lot of older men, appealing to the instinct of protection, send them to safety. These terror flyers, these things you see overhead are going to continue to rain destruction on them. Now we'll get to the crew, the actual plane and the pilots who are going to face the atrocities on the ground. The plane's called Wham Bam Thank You Ma'am. It has a picture of a rabbit on it and was not the plane that these pilots trained on. It was not the one they flew. Their B-24 was getting its some repairs done to it, being modified for the later stages of the air war. So this is a borrowed aircraft. They're going to be making their first bombing run. This is the first time that they're going to go face it, and they continue getting delayed a few days by weather here. They are delayed for another thing here. The logistics aren't working out. So they've been sitting on the ground in England just doing practice, running their usual calculations on where they could possibly go. And then they finally get their mission, and when they wake up and they get their real eggs instead of their powdered eggs, that's when they realize, oh, we're actually going to go today. And since they've been delayed so many times, some of them actually forgot their dog tags. So they're thinking, we're not going to go. I don't need my dog tags. I'm just going to go to breakfast. Once they finish breakfast, they have no time to go back and get them. And the lack of dog tags is going to be another issue that's going to come out in this later. And they're going to be attacking an airfield that's a little bit north of Hanover. And it's a tactical target. It is an airfield that's being used for training and for the storage of planes at that time. And here are at this point, 10. There's only going to be 9 that fly. Here are the 10 crew of that plane. The bombardier and the navigator were off getting advanced training, so they were not part of the mission. He was replaced by what they would call a bombardier, who served as both the bombardier and the navigator on this plane. So what would have been a crew of 10 was actually a crew of 9. and here's their names. Our guy at the bottom here are where it says navigator and bombardier. Almost nobody on the crew even knows who he is. He shows up late. He's the last one to get on the plane. Very few people are interacting with him during the flight itself. So when they're captured, they actually think that he's a German spy when they get out there, because no one had seen him. He's Armenian, so he doesn't look like the rest of them do. The Germans who encounter him are going to think that he's Jewish at the same time. So he's sort of a wild card in this whole thing. And again, here's where our action is going to take place. The airfield a little bit north of Hanover, and Rüsselsheim, my mark's a little off. It's a little bit southwest of Frankfurt, Germany. So they're going to come across the English Channel, and it's going to be a huge, huge mission. The largest one up to this point, although this is a part of the war where it seemed like every run was the largest in history up to that point. Then next week, they have another largest run in history up to that point. A total of 1,247 aircraft involved in the mission. They're all going to get up in the air and go their separate ways, multiple targets to hit in Germany at the same time. 72 of those bombers are going to hit that same Langenhagen airfield a little bit north of Hanover. Of those, 71 bombers are going to make it back. So the resistance was not all that great at the time. It was deemed a success when they all got back to England. We only lost one bomber on this entire run. And the way that it was lost, bombing was successful. They opened the bomb bay doors, bombs came out, actually hit the airfield. So one of those great stories of accuracy, until there's some flak that explodes underneath the bomb bay. Bomb bay doors get stuck, some of the shrapnel comes in, hits one of the crewmen in the stomach, he's severely wounded, and disables one engine entirely, two others partially. So the plane's essentially going only on one engine at this point, and no way it's going to get back to England. With the bomb bay doors being stuck open, there's even extra drag. They're not going to get very far from where they've been on this. And they're going to come out, they realize they got to go. They've never jumped out of a plane before. They stopped doing this as practice runs because there were too many people hurting themselves on the practice runs. You need the crew in the plane, so if they're spraining their ankles, their knees, breaking their legs on the practice jumps, they're useless to get up into the plane. So they're going to come out the bomb bay doors. They figured that was the best way to do it. They abandon the plane, come out the bomb bay doors. They were told, wait 10 seconds before your parachute goes out. Most of them did not. They panicked before that, but they all did make it to the ground safely. Most of them said it might have been about 5 seconds. The one who went 10, some of the survivors of this incident, the one who waited 10 seconds, they thought that his didn't work, that they were panicking in the air for him already, and he was the only one who actually followed the rules on how long you were supposed to wait before you deployed your parachute. Now, as they're going down, they know they're going to be captured. And they're in Germany, so there's this, what did they know, what were they told, and what did they actually expect to happen about being captured? They had all looked at this before, and you can see May 16th, 1944 edition here. They'd all seen this, and they knew when you're interrogated, all you need is name, rank, serial number. So they know that. They know that they're fighting a war against the Germans who, by and large, have not been treating them all that awful. It's not like going down where you're going to be captured by the Pacific. So those are the things that they knew. What they were told in this picture, there's something about this picture the stoic German soldier and the slightly relieved or helpful captives and everything. But what they were told are the things here, that the German military must protect you against active violence. You must be fed and clothed. You're a prisoner of war, not a criminal. Now here's what they knew and what they feared. What they feared was that they were going to land in the middle of a place they just bombed, and that they were going to be facing a crowd that had just lost some of its own. That was their big fear. In fact, one of the guys who survived this had nightmares that were very, very similar to what they're going to experience on the ground. What they knew is that wherever they went, the people were not going to be happy. Whether it was a place near where they bombed or maybe 50 miles away, they knew that the people on the ground were not going to be happy with them. And they were probably not going to get wounded or sick treatment. They were expecting that they were going to come down and probably get some beatings. They knew the officers would probably be treated a little better. But those are some of the things that they knew as they looked through this. So all 9 do survive the descent. When they land, some of them are a little more fortunate. They come across a farmhouse where they do get their wounds treated. They do get fed. Typically they're being fed by younger people. And then when the father or grandfather or somebody comes home, he sees them, he's like, get him to the nearest town, turn him in immediately. They have no choice but to go. What they have on them is they have fake European ID cards so that they took pictures to where they looked and dressed like they were from a European country. And they had those on them, but they're not really useful when you're still wearing your uniform and you had just bailed out of your plane. So their currency, their fake IDs, none of that's going to mean anything when they're captured immediately there. So they get what they expected. They're sitting in a room and the German interrogators are playing the trick cards on them. They ask one of the guys, oh, where are you from? He says, Gainesville, Florida. And he goes, yes, I've been to Florida many times, love it there. And the guy asks him, so what part? And he goes, oh, all up and down and around, all of Florida. I've seen all of it. And trying to get the kind of buddy thing. And then when that doesn't work, they send him to the more forceful interrogations. So they kind of get what they expect when they're out there. And they convince the crew member who faced the shrapnel wounds in his stomach that he's sent elsewhere. He's going to go get his medical treatment, and he's going to spend the rest of his time in an actual prison camp. The rest of them are going to be taken to another interrogation center south of Frankfurt. And here's our guy who's severely injured. He's going to be sent, again, elsewhere. So they're captured nearish Hanover, and they're going to be sent by rail down to near Frankfurt. And Rüsselsheim's going to be a little bit on the way based on those train tracks. The train ride, it's what they expected. Every time they stop somewhere and German citizens see that there's Allied airmen on board, they're being spit at, they're being booed, they're being jeered. It's what they expected. At one point, there's a bombing run later in the day. They have to abandon the train. They take shelter with the German guards. So they're getting to experience on the ground what they had been doing from the sky. Now, they knew what the ground probably looked like based on this, but it's something they didn't want to think about. But when they're experiencing it as they're taking cover with the German guards, they're getting that idea in their heads of, I really just hope that they can get to a place where they're going to be held and kept safe, still hours from their interrogation center. Now here's what Rüsselsheim, the town, is going through at roughly the same time, the night August 25th to August 26th. Air raid sirens go off at 11 o'clock. They have their Nazi official in town, who's also the air raid warden, and all German citizens of Rüsselsheim take cover in their bomb shelters. Forced laborers, those from the Eastern Front who are captured, people from France, they are not brought into the bomb shelters. They are left out to sort of fend for themselves, take cover where they can. That's going to play a role in how this action gets found out later. This bombing comes out 674 larger impact bombs. The idea here is hit those down first, blow up the buildings on the ground, put all this essentially kindling and fuel out into the streets, drop the incendiaries. The incendiaries have plenty of things to flare up, keep them going. Some of the incendiaries have a delay on them. They'll go off later. So a part they thought was out suddenly catches fire again. So this is going to be seen, these flames are going to be seen from over 100 miles away. So this was one of the largest runs at that point. It's going to keep getting bigger and bigger and bigger, but one of the largest runs up to that point. What they're trying to hit and their rationale for it is to hit this Opel Auto Works plant here. Great story about that. That could be a lecture for an entire other event. This was owned by GM. GM bought it in 1931, owned the plant through the duration of the war, and kind of held back a little bit as they watched the Nazification of the plant take over. Really, really interesting story that would become an entire other lecture. At this point, this plant is making parts for aircraft and tanks. So the big hub of this, the center of this entire town, is this Auto Works plant, and that's what the plant's going to look like by the end of these runs that are coming through at this point in time. And you can imagine if this large reinforced building looks like this, what a typical town that sprung up in the 15th century, what the rest of that's going to look like by the end of it. So the manufacturing's knocked out. The forced laborers take the brunt of what's going to be the casualty count here. 198 killed, over 170 of those were forced laborers. So the people who lived in the town, their toll was only in the 20s at this point. The fires continue to burn all night. There's still some burning the next day, and hardly a building is going to be left standing in the residential portions. The large reinforced factory building still standing. They can still salvage some things in there, but most of the residential stuff is going to be left. Now, what the bombing run did also is it blew up the rail lines that led into this town. The rail lines that our pilots who abandoned their plane near Hanover had to take through that train to get to the interrogation center. So the rail lines are blown up. The pilots have to walk through the town. The Germans, when they see the train are there, their German guards go out, do a little advanced scouting, figure out what they have to do. One of them comes back. The most experienced elder one does not come back. He just abandons this whole idea of trying to do this. They come back and they make a plan. We're going to have to walk into this town. They've located where the train station's going to be, where they can catch another train and get where they need to go. But now you have guards who are guarding them, who just went through a bombing run of their own with them. They're stressed, they're disoriented. At this point, they're lacking experience. Their most experienced one bails on them. You're going to have some very, very angry citizens who just spent the whole night putting out a fire. So you're going to have very, very angry citizens, the town reduced to rubble, and they're still wearing their identifying airman uniforms. Now, the citizens of this town, they don't know the difference between a British uniform, a Canadian uniform, or an American uniform. They did know from the planes above that it was likely a British raid. So they're thinking that these were British or Canadian flyers. And half are saying they're British, half are saying they're Canadian. They get to the town, and they're going to be told, you shouldn't come here, you should go elsewhere, by one of the officials in that town. They continue to push through. To back up a little bit, highlight a few of the citizens of the town who are going to be prominent in the trial. The Scholl sisters, who their family business was a tobacco shop. Their mother had it and ran it, and then she leaves it to them to run this shop. And Kathy Reinhardt and Margaret Witzler are the sisters. They are popular before the war because they have a tobacco shop. During the war, they are not popular because they have to deny people tobacco. It's rationed. They can't get it all. So people who need their tobacco are needed, I guess, with their addictions, needed are not going to be able to get all the tobacco they want from them. But there's this sort of, like a German feeling that people are always trying to put one over on you, that people are trying to get something from you or trying to pull the wool over your eyes. And because of who they were, they could trade cigarettes to certain people in town who had things they wanted, while others didn't get what they wanted because they had nothing to offer the Scholl sisters. So the Scholl sisters, one of them with a husband on the Eastern Front, both of them have children, spared during the invasion, but both of them do have, or during the attack, both of them do have children. These are going to be two very prominent people in the attack, as when the pilots go through town, a crowd starts to form. So the pilots are walking, they're being brought toward the center of town, people start following. They see them, they think these are the pilots, this is the crew who bombed us last night. Kathy Reinhardt is the one who stands up on some of the rubble and shouts, those are the terror flyers, tear them to pieces. And then she picks up a brick from the street and throws it, which is the spark. And then her sister Margaret picks up another piece of rubble from the street and throws it. And once that happens, once the two women have done this, the gates open. That's when everybody can come out. So you have your guy who's in his yard with a shovel getting rid of some debris. He gets his shovel and runs out. You have the guys with the clubs, they run out. You have people who, 60-year-old men are running out into the street to at least kick these guys if they can. And this is going to go on for over an hour. That these guys are going to be herded by their German guards for a while to try to keep the crowd away. The crowd eventually turns on the German guards. And the Nazi official in the town has his pistol out and threatens the German guards of no interference. And the guards just sort of disappear into the background. They're not going to get involved in the middle of this mob. Again, we have the Reinhardt with the brick. Her sister joins in. But for 1 hour, this is going to go on with tools, bricks, rubble, fists, kicks, whatever they can use on these flyers. They're going to get them pinned up against a wall at one point. And one guy, Joseph Hartgen, who's a Nazi official of the town, at the very end of this, he's going to have all their bodies arranged onto a sidewalk, laying all parallel. And he takes it upon himself to end it, partially motivated to get the mob back to work in the repairing and bracing of the town, partially to punish the airmen some more. And he's the one who will do the execution-style shootings. He'll have the 6 airmen. At this point, 8 airmen. He'll have them lined up, the one who was sent away, and in his revolver, he still had 4 bullets. So 4 shots to the head on 4 of the guys, runs out of bullets. After that, he's going to direct the Hitler Youth in the town to take them by cart out to the cemetery and bury them to get them out. Now, Hartgen was, when I was reading about him and seeing his pictures, he's almost like the cartoonish Nazi that you see, like the stereotypical one, the short guy who marches everywhere, the guy whose uniform makes him. And that's the way the town described him. Once he became the Nazi official in this town, formerly he was a foreman at the plant, he starts marching everywhere he can go. He's barking out orders every time he can. And he's going to come into this as being, you're a guy who could have stopped this when the trial gets there. Now, 2 of the guys are going to escape, despite the severe beatings that they take and the ride in the cart that they're put into the cemetery. 2 of them are going to survive. Now, they're groaning. There's groans coming from the cart. And the caretaker, who's tasked with burying the bodies, is going to get a large wooden board out, and he's just going to start beating the cart until the air raid sirens go off again, and everybody leaves the cemetery, and he has to take cover. 2 of the guys, Adams and Brown, are going to leave the cart. They're going to get out. They're going to realize that there's nobody else in the cart who can come with them, and they're going to bail, and they're going to be on the run for 5 days. And they're a mess. They're covered in blood. They smell. They have no food, no anything on them. But they make it for 5 days out on their own before they're recaptured. They're going to spend the rest of their war in Stalag Luft 4. So they're going to survive. No one in the town knows about this. No one in the town knows that 2 guys made it out of the cart. So they're going to continue to talk about the 8 airmen, and when they're dug up later, there's only going to be 6. So at this point, we had 8 airmen get into the town out of the 9 who were on the crew, and at this point, the only ones alive are these 3. Your nose gunner, tail gunner, engineer. And he's away from the rest of them. He's brought elsewhere. These 2 are on the run. And the rumors don't really get out of the town. No one knows who they are except airmen on the run when they're caught. And they're not interrogated. They don't speak anything of it. They don't say anything about the experience they went through to any German person who encounters them for fear of being sent back there, or someone who knows it trying to finish the job. So they say nothing about this for the duration of the war. They say nothing about it after the war as well. Now this is where the Geneva Convention is going to come in. And this is what's going to make this a very, very clear violation of the Geneva Convention. This is the parts that were added in 1929. Prisoners of war in the power of the hostile power, but not of the individuals or the corps who have captured them. These men were in Germany's power. They were not under the custody of any one individual. They were not in the custody of the citizens of that town who encountered them. They must at all times be humanely treated and protected, particularly against acts of violence, insults, and public curiosity. Germany signed this. Japan had not signed this treaty, so there's going to be some differences in Japan. Measures of reprisal against them are prohibited. So what's going to make the prosecution of this appealing is that you have very, very clear violations of written things that were agreed to by a country here. Now the discovery. March 1945, Rüsselsheim is taken over, the Americans run it, and all those forced laborers that were there that weren't allowed any shelter protection, that were forced to work, that had the long hours and that had to live out the bombing runs on their own, they start to talk about, to the Americans, about what had happened there. That 8 airmen were beaten here, that they were left for dead. The clergy in the town couldn't stop it. No one could stop it. Anyone who tried to intervene was threatened, was pushed away. And they start to document, because they want to, at the end of this war, bring anyone who's responsible for any crimes against Americans or allies, they want to bring them to justice at the end. And then they get as many Nazis from the area who they've captured, bring them to the cemetery to dig up the bodies. Your number one source of evidence. They find 6 of them. They find some of the more fresh graves that were in the cemetery. They find 6 of them, but the stories had all said 8. So they make those Nazis dig up every section of that cemetery they can. And when they finally have dug up every single part of it, they're like, well, okay, that's enough. We'll go with the 6 that we have here. But the charges are going to continue to bring up 8. Now here's the interesting thing on this trial. The trial is going to begin. They find all their evidence. Almost everybody who's going to be brought up on charges is going to be either in their 50s or older, or a woman, or somewhere around middle age with some sort of condition that kept them out of military service. So it's going to be this group of civilians who've had a hard last year at least, and it's kind of a pitiful lot of people that are put on trial here. They're not in uniform. They're not, with the exception of the one Nazi official, they're not standing there barking out Nazi doctrine or anything. They're not doing any of that. It's going to be just this 11 civilians here. Now the defense is going to kind of run as a military tribunal. The person in charge of their defense is really worried that here you have a town, you have probably 100, 150 people who took part in this beating. How did they find only 11 of these? And this is going to kind of rub at some consciences here of how did they get these 11 here? Are these 11 the right ones? Were there any grudges that made it be these 11 people? Well, they're going to leave it to the trial to sort that out, although the burden of evidence is going to be a little less than it would be in a criminal trial. So the trial is going to last for 6 days, starts July 25th, 1945. So happening very, very quickly after Germany is surrendered. Charge is going to be the violation of the laws of war as were written in the Geneva Convention. The prosecutor for this is going to be Leon Jaworski, who comes to fame in the Watergate scandals later. So they're going to get, and he's already prosecuted 2 other World War II related crimes that occurred in the United States. So he's going to be experienced in these kinds of things. He believes that this was a very, very clear violation because it was written down, because Germany signed to it, and because their citizens should have known. So they're going to do the evidence. I like this headline. It's not as spectacular as what this might seem, but it makes it seem like they walked into this Nazis thing, cut him, or they walked to the gallows, cut him down, and walked him straight into court to testify. He was actually one of the people on trial for this. He was trying to commit suicide, was cut down 2 days before by his guard who saw this happening, and then came in and was forced to testify in this. So the trial, the evidence is going to be mainly they've exhumed the bodies, they found the impact points, they found crushed skulls, they found the bullet holes. A lot of eyewitness accounts, not from the forced laborers, but eyewitness accounts from other citizens of Rüsselsheim. So there's going to be a lot of eyewitness accounts here. If you're thinking of this like a defense attorney, of course they're going to testify against them because they're not getting prosecuted themselves. So of course they're going. So the defense is going to try to argue that they're just saying he did it, so you don't think he did it. And so no accounts from the 2 survivors. Even still in July 45, they don't know that 2 guys made it out because those 2 guys aren't talking about it. The defense. Now, you're allowed to make a sworn or an unsworn statement in these tribunals. 7 of them are going to give unsworn statements, 4 are going to give sworn statements. The sworn statement is supposed to be taken more seriously. An unsworn statement, you don't have to put much stock into at all. And the gist of it is, I didn't do it. Maybe I kicked him once, or I only joined in the last 5 minutes. They were gone. I looked at it from my house. I didn't see it that way. They're going to bring out some character witnesses. So like the local priest will come out, or the former town mayor, or a former supervisor at a factory are going to come out and say, he's always been a good man. I've never known him anything to do anything like this. So, and then they're going to say the prosecution witnesses all have a grudge. This is something, because this is an American-run trial here, they're going to say, you don't know the intricacies of this town. These 2 families have had rivalries for years. It dates back hundreds of years. Or they wouldn't give tobacco to him, or they wouldn't sell bread to her with her baby. And so the defense is going to make these things. And this is interesting in that it only comes from the defense attorney, not from any of the citizens in this trial. It was Goebbels' fault. If he wouldn't have been up there yelling about this and telling us to get those flyers with a knife, or that everyone that we see should encounter some aspect of this war, then these people would not have done it. They're just primitive, the words the defense attorney used, they were just primitive pawns in Goebbels' grand vision. And they went through how these are simple folk who only know how to put cars together or farm their fields, and they were just angry. So the Garibal's Fault thing, no one from the town says anything about, well, the climate that we were in made me do this. They all pretty much stick to, I didn't do it, or maybe I kicked him. I don't really remember. So the judgment comes in, 11 people on trial. One of them is going to get the acquittal. He made the sworn statement, and they couldn't find any other townsfolk to place his actions in the right context with the rest of it. They had used what the defendants all said about each other. They had used the eyewitness accounts from those who were not being prosecuted. So the one person who was acquitted, they couldn't fit him in based on all the other accounts, and he gave the sworn statement. The others, the evidence portrays a blood-hungry, brutal mob incensed by the damage done to their village during the preceding night's raid, determined to exact revenge from the helpless aviators in its clutches. So that is going to be the finding of this tribunal. They're going to send it up the chain to get this verified, and it's going to be verified, and we're going to get the sentences. Out of the 11, 7 will be sentenced to death. This is going to include the 2 women. The 2 women who are the inciting of this, originally, they are going to be sentenced to death. One other person is going to be put on trial later. It's a German soldier who was in the town and participated. Not one of the guards, but someone who was a German soldier in the town. Some of the others are given varying prison terms. The 2 women later, just for image issues, no real new evidence or anything like that comes out. Just from an image point of view, the United States is not going to hang 2 middle-aged to elderly women and have this filmed and broadcast around the world. So they're going to later get prison sentences instead of being hung. But originally, their sentence will be that they will be hung. Outcomes of this trial, for the most part, they say it was fair. And I like the quote here from a resident in the town, Darmstadt, where the trial was held. Probably the fairest political trial any German has had since 1933. Now, is there a consensus on that? No, there's not a consensus. There's not even a consensus on that in the United States. Some people are claiming, as they usually would, that this is victor's justice, that this is the victors pushing their own values or making sure that all the citizens know that who won this war. There's going to be what's called a Committee for the Protection of Citizens that's in the United States that writes letters to both the prosecutors and defense attorneys in this case. They're going to be saying they're just citizens. How would you have reacted if your town had been blown to bits? You have your children screaming in the street. You've been putting out fires all night. How would you feel about it? Forrest Brennenstuhl, who was the one who was injured, who was taken elsewhere, he says roughly the same thing. He was surprised. He was shocked that came to a trial and the civilians were brought up on trial because he couldn't say he would have acted any differently if it would have happened to him. In Germany, they really don't say much about it one way or another, and I think among the Germans there's that fear of, under the previous regime, you know what happens if you spoke out against a trial or a crime or a prosecution, and they're unsure of, are we allowed to speak out if we want to? So basically most of what's going to come out of this is going to be admitting that it was fair, admitting that it was the fairest political trial since 1933. They wait several months, and some of the families of those who were killed are getting very impatient. They wait until November before the hangings actually occur. They're going to hang 5, and then the German soldiers are going to be hung the next year, so a total of 6 who are going to be hung from this trial. Same executioner that's going to be employed after the Nuremberg trials. So the same guy with the noose. I forget his name, but he's a kind of a brash Texan who really loved his job. Maybe a little too much. But anyway, this is Joseph Hartgen being led out. He's going to be the last to be hung on this specific day. They hung one, they'd wait a half hour, do the others. There's videos of the hanging, but it is kind of tough to watch. So now where this all fits in history, why Rüsselsheim was selected as being the first true test of American justice in an occupied territory after World War II, clearly you had the violation. It was very, very, very clear that those 3 sections of the Geneva Convention were violated by the actions in this town. All the culprits were still there. The only person who left was Joseph Hartgen, the Nazi official, and he left because he didn't want to be a Nazi official who was captured. He tried to find any way to get out of it. So he's captured elsewhere, but everyone else that was rumored to be involved in this was still there. You had the belief that the beginning, when the Americans first hear of this, is that they're Canadian airmen. So it's not Americans even seeking justice for their own people. It's that this is going to be a systematic way of approaching justice for anyone who was faced a war crime during this. So anyone who faced these atrocities was going to be prosecuted by the occupying power of the area they were in. This crime occurred in Germany, would be prosecuted in Germany, in an American-occupied zone, prosecuted by the American military tribunal system. And you had the evidence. They dug up the bodies. You had people willing to testify against this. All the evidence pointed to this is going to be able to be prosecuted. This trial will work. So why at the time? Those 4 reasons are why it was there at the time. Then you had the legitimacy. This is a change from World War I. The World War I trials were not looked at as being legitimate at all. They were a clear case of victor's justice, especially on the part of the Germans who faced the trial. You had the rationale and this attempt at re-education, showing the Germans what a fair trial looks like, what justice really looks like. It's an educational opportunity, they're thinking. Show them, try them here, let them in. This courtroom is packed. One of the reasons they moved it out of Rüsselsheim, where the courthouse was destroyed, into Darmstadt, was Darmstadt had a larger courtroom. If Nancy Grace was around, Nancy Grace probably would have covered this one and had all kinds of stuff coming out on this one. But it was an attempt at educating the Germans about the American justice process. And then later, it's going to lead into the Nuremberg trials, but they're going to have a separate issue. And actually, Leon Jaworski is not going to take part in Nuremberg, and he does so because he did not believe that the laws that were accused of being violated at Nuremberg were codified and written down prior to the war. That he didn't feel that it was written down that you could try someone for pushing an aggressive war. So he doesn't feel that Nuremberg is going to have the same legitimacy that Rüsselsheim had, because Rüsselsheim was the clear violation of something written down and agreed to. And it's later going to be looked at as a form of reconciliation, that as awful as this whole issue was, you're going to start looking 20, 30, 40 years later, reconciliation starts to be the word that's used a lot of this. Now here's that the New York Times article that I started with of September 15th, 1945. Now this is speaking about a lot of hardships that Germans were being put under. Requisitioning of houses, requisitioning of all kinds of things, a very regimented type of life, curfews, those things. And the New York Times here is making the point that it wasn't just because your responsibility was when the war started, your responsibility was as a German citizen to stop this before it got out of hand. That this war is not bad because it took your people. This war is bad because it took millions of people, tens of millions of people. That this war was not just because of your portion of the world, that the Germans should feel a responsibility for the entirety of the conflict, at least in Europe. And this trial plays a part in that, making the Germans feel the responsibility for the larger picture of the war, despite just their own hardships. Where this comes into reconciliation is in about 2000, the families of the killed airmen start to make trips over there, that they finally give in to the curiosity. They don't start to put all this together because the names of the airmen were not released during the trial. They start to put it all together later on in the 40s, into the 50s. And their curiosity is finally aroused enough that they go to Rüsselsheim starting in the late 90s, early 2000s. The daughter of the lead pilot, who's still alive today, she visits in 2001 to finally put this all to rest. And there's, if you search it on the internet, you'll find some news coverage of her going over there to visit, taking pictures of this. She visits a few more times. This was put up in 2004. These are the 8 airmen, and these are the pictures that they had to use were the fake identification pictures. So these are the pictures of them, with the exception of this one here. This is the pictures of them who are made to look like they could be from Europe. These are their fake ID pictures. But it's the only ones that they had to work with. This was put up by the city of Rüsselsheim itself. So put up as sort of an act of healing and not really dwelling too much on the trial or what happened to its citizens, but more on the act of healing. So with that, I hope I gave you a good overview of this trial's place in history without getting too much into the legal aspects and all that. And I do thank you all for coming, and I'll take a few questions. I'd had my first over there.
How many years did the two ladies get?
I believe they got life. They did put it to life. I know that they never did actually get out. They may have given them 25 years and they died in captivity, but they did get life sentences out of it. Yeah, somebody else took over the tobacco store. The image problem was with the hanging of a woman. That was not something that they wanted to show. Yeah.
The defendants were tried by military tribunal?
It was under military tribunal. It was with a few.
As a jury or like?
No, it was there was a finding that the court would make, that sort of a judge would make in this, and then he would have to send it up the chain to have military stamp of approval on it. So it was not a jury. The burden of proof was not the same. It didn't have to be unanimous. So there's a lot of differences that this one had. This was an adapted military tribunal to kind of soften up some of it to make it more appealing and softer on the German side. Yeah.
Which are the two survivors?
Two survivors are the two on the bottom right here. These are the two survived. And he grew up in Pennsylvania, Dutch country, and so he knew a little bit of German. So he could understand a little bit, and that's what enabled them to be on the run for 5 days, is that he could understand parts of what people were saying.
When were they eventually identified as having been part of this?
They sent a letter 2 months after the hangings, that they had sent a letter saying, and then adding their story into this, which from the court's perspective corroborated the evidence that the court had presented from the testimony of the Rüsselsheim eyewitnesses. So what their descriptions of the event matched how the court was able to piece together the event with very, very few inconsistencies in it. So and that's where the names of the others came out, because some of these guys didn't have dog tags. They weren't known until the letter that these two guys wrote that named the entire crew that was with them that day. So the ones who were missing dog tags were finally identified through their letter. Yeah.
Did they just not know about the trial, or they didn't want to be a part of it, or how
the news was different. Like, this trial's being covered in Boston and the New York Times, so they're not seeing it. It's getting covered as sort of, yes, it's happening, and they're not putting it together, and they're trying to figure out who to write a letter to at the same time. So they found out that it was going on and found out who to write to, but everybody thought they were dead. These were the two missing when they dug up the grave, so no one thought to look for them because no one had mentioned that they got away, and they didn't talk about it until after they'd heard about the trial. Yeah?
Trying to look European, couldn't you be shot immediately as a spy?
Possibly. I guess they figured it's...
I don't think it's possible.
It's better. I thought they thought it was...
We better keep my uniform on.
Yeah.
I mean, you'd be shot on the spot there.
Yeah.
You know what's on the other side of it?
I don't know what's on the other side.
I mean, is there,
So
would you assume?
I assume that it would be the pictures both sides, or maybe a plaque about the actual story.
Tobacco advertisement.
Yeah, that's it. That's it. So. All right, well, thank you all for showing up. It was a pleasure talking to you today.